There are things a man does in his life that make no sense to anyone watching. Things that look like madness from the outside, feel like the only possible choice from within. What Thomas Ridley did in the summer of 1872 was one of those things. He rode alone into a Lakota war camp of 300 warriors, unarmed, to ask a chief who had killed more white men than anyone could count for permission to marry his daughter. This is that story. Thomas Ridley came to the Montana Territory in the spring of 1868, carrying everything he owned on the back of a chestnut mare named Copper and a pack mule he called Patience. He was 24 years old, lean as a fence rail, with sun-darkened skin, sharp blue eyes, and hands that had already seen more work than most men see in a lifetime. His hair was dark brown, kept long enough to touch his collar, and a scar ran from his left eyebrow to his temple, a souvenir from a bar fight in Abilene that he'd won but not without cost. He wore the same thing every day: faded brown leather duster over a cotton shirt, dark trousers tucked into scuffed boots, and a wide-brimmed hat the color of dust that had been reshaped by rain and sun so many times it had become something unique, something that belonged only to him. He'd been a cattle drover, a horse breaker, a scout for a wagon train, and briefly a deputy in a town so small it didn't survive long enough to get a proper name. None of those jobs had stuck. Not because Thomas was lazy or incompetent, he was neither, but because every place he went, he eventually found the same thing. People who were more interested in what a man looked like than what he was. People who drew lines and expected everyone to stay on their assigned side. Thomas had never been good at staying on his assigned side. The war had taught him that. 4 years of watching men sort themselves into blues and grays and kill each other over principles that looked different from the top of a hill than they did from the bottom of a trench. He'd started the war believing in sides. He'd ended it believing in people, individual, specific, flawed, magnificent people who deserved to be judged by what they did, not which uniform they wore or what color their skin was. That belief had cost him friends who couldn't understand why he'd shared his rations with captured Confederates, officers who'd questioned his loyalty when he'd refused to burn a farmhouse with civilians inside, a society that expected him to hate on command and celebrate violence as virtue. So he'd left, walked away from a world that demanded he be smaller than he was. Gone west, where the land was big enough to hold a man's full size without crushing him. He built his ranch in a valley along the Yellowstone River, where the water ran cold and clear, and the grass grew thick in the bottomlands. It was beautiful country, the kind that made a man believe God might have been in a good mood when he made it. Mountains to the west, rolling, prairie to the east, and enough game and water to support a man who didn't need much. Thomas didn't need much. His nearest neighbors were the Lakota. The Hunkpapa band under Chief Iron Elk had been using this stretch of the Yellowstone for generations. They camped along the river in summer, hunted the hills in autumn, and retreated to sheltered valleys in winter. They hadn't asked Thomas's permission to be there, and he hadn't asked theirs. The land was big enough for both, and for the first 2 years, they coexisted the way wildlife coexists, aware of each other, cautious, keeping distance. That changed the day Thomas pulled Iron Elk's daughter out of the Yellowstone River. It was late spring, the time when the snowmelt turned the river from a gentle stream into a roaring, ice-cold torrent that could sweep a horse off its feet and a man to his death in seconds. Thomas was riding the riverbank, checking for cattle that might have wandered too close to the swollen water, when he heard the scream. Not a word, not a call for help, just a sound, sharp and brief, cut short by water. He kicked Copper into a gallop and came around a bend to see a figure in the current. Dark hair streaming, arms fighting the water, being swept downstream at a speed that left seconds before the rapids below would turn survival into impossibility. Thomas didn't think. Thinking would have taken too long. He spurred Copper into the river, the mare plunging chest deep into the water so cold it burned, and rode downstream at an angle, cutting the distance. The current was savage, pulling at the horse's legs, trying to rip them both off their feet. Copper fought it with the stubborn courage that was the best thing about her, driving forward through water that rose to Thomas's waist and then his chest. He reached the woman 10 yards before the rapids, grabbed her arm with one hand, his grip iron on her wrist, and hauled her across the saddle in a single motion that nearly pulled his shoulder from its socket. Copper lunged for the bank, hooves finding purchase on the rocky bottom, and dragged them both out of the current in a surge of power that left all three of them gasping on the muddy shore. The woman coughed water and shivered violently. Thomas pulled off his leather duster and wrapped it around her, the heavy coat swallowing her frame. She was young, maybe 20, with a face that even half drowned and blue with cold was striking. high cheekbones beneath smooth copper-brown skin, dark eyes shaped like almonds set beneath strong brows, a jaw that balanced delicacy with determination. Her hair was long and black as a raven's wing, plastered to her face and neck by the river. She wore a deerskin dress decorated with elaborate beadwork and quill work, fine craftsmanship that spoke of status and care. She looked at him with those dark almond-shaped eyes, not afraid, not grateful, just intensely, fiercely present, alive in every cell, vibrating with the shock of almost not being. Alive and studying the man who'd changed that outcome with the focused attention of someone who took the measure of things quickly and accurately. She said something in Lakota. Thomas shook his head. She tried again, this time in a mixture of Lakota and broken English. "You cold," she pointed at him. He was standing in the wind in his shirt sleeves, soaked to the bone, shivering almost as hard as she was. "I'll dry," he said. "You need a fire." He built one. Right there on the riverbank, from driftwood and dry grass, working fast because hypothermia didn't wait for ceremony. She huddled near the flames while he stripped Copper's saddle and rubbed the mares down with handfuls of dry grass. The horse had earned extra grain tonight. She'd earned extra grain for a month. They sat by the fire as the sun moved across the sky. She told him her name, slowly, teaching him the sounds. Winona. She was the daughter of Iron Elk, chief of the Hunkpapa band that camped along the Yellowstone. She'd been gathering roots near the river when the bank gave way beneath her feet. Thomas told her his name. They exchanged words like traders exchanging goods, horse, water, fire, sky, simple things, foundation stones. When she was warm enough to travel, a group of warriors appeared on the bluff above the river. They'd been searching for her. The lead rider looked down at the scene. A Lakota woman wearing a white man's coat, a white man sitting beside her by a fire. Their expressions were not friendly. Winona stood and spoke to them in rapid Lakota. Whatever she said, it changed the temperature. The warriors' hostility didn't disappear, but it shifted, became something more measured. They came down to the riverbank. One of them returned the duster to Thomas. Another brought a horse for Winona. She mounted, looked back at Thomas one last time with those dark, almond-shaped eyes, and rode away with her people. Thomas watched them go and felt something he hadn't felt before. Not attraction, though that was there too. Something deeper, recognition. The sense of looking at another person and seeing, for the first time, the shape of the life you were supposed to live. He tried to ignore it. For months, he threw himself into ranch work with doubled intensity, built a new section of corral, extended the cabin, broke 3 new horses, worked himself to exhaustion every day and lay awake every night, staring at the ceiling, seeing dark, almond-shaped eyes in the darkness. The frontier had no room for what he was feeling, a white man and a Lakota woman. It was impossible, dangerous, the kind of thing that got people killed on both sides. He knew this. He told himself this. He repeated it like a prayer every morning when he woke and every night before he failed to sleep. Then she came back. 3 months after the river, Winona appeared at his ranch, alone, on horseback, wearing the same beadwork dress, her raven black hair braided with leather wraps and a single eagle feather. She dismounted by the corral where Thomas was working and stood there, waiting for him to acknowledge her. He walked over. His heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. Winona? Thomas Ridley. She'd been practicing his name. The sounds were careful, deliberate, shaped by a mouth more accustomed to Lakota phonemes, but she'd gotten it right. She held out something, a pair of moccasins, beautifully made, the beadwork matching the pattern on her dress, blue and white and red, in geometric designs that seemed to contain meaning he couldn't read. "For you," she said, "because you gave your coat. I return equal." Thomas took the moccasins. Their eyes met. Whatever was happening between them, whatever impossible, dangerous, world-defying thing was taking root in the space between a cowboy and a chief's daughter, it was real. It was undeniable, and neither of them had the slightest idea what to do about it. But they figured it out. Over the following months, Winona came to the ranch regularly, sometimes with a young warrior escort who stayed on the ridge and watched with obvious disapproval, sometimes alone, which was either an act of trust or an act of rebellion, and Thomas suspected it was both. She brought gifts. He gave them in return. Dried meat for coffee beans, beadwork for a steel knife, stories traded in a language they were building together from English and Lakota, and gestures and long silences that said more than words. She learned English with frightening speed. Within 3 months, she was constructing sentences. Within 6, she was holding conversations. Within a year, she was making jokes, dry observations about the differences between their worlds that made Thomas laugh out loud, a sound his cabin hadn't heard in years. He learned Lakota more slowly, but he learned the words for water and fire and horse and sky, the words for beautiful and brave and stubborn, which she taught him while laughing at his pronunciation, the word for love, which she taught him quietly on an evening when the sunset turned the river to gold and neither of them wanted to go home. They both knew what was coming, what had to happen if this was going to be more than stolen visits and secret conversations. Thomas had to go to Iron Elk, had to ride into a camp of 300 warriors and ask the most powerful chief in the territory for his daughter's hand. The idea was insane. Thomas knew it was insane. Winona knew it was insane. But she also told him, with a directness that left no room for ambiguity, that it was the only way. In Lakota culture, a marriage required the father's blessing. Without it, she would be an outcast, cut off from her people, her family, her identity. She would not pay that price, and Thomas would not ask her to. So on a morning in July, when the Montana sky was so blue it hurt to look at it, and the prairie was alive with wildflowers and the song of meadowlarks, Thomas Ridley saddled Copper, put on his cleanest shirt, left every weapon he owned hanging on the cabin wall, and rode north toward the Lakota camp. He rode for 2 days, through country so beautiful it seemed designed to make a man feel small. Valleys of wildflowers, rivers running clear over colored stones, mountains wearing caps of snow, even in summer. And everywhere, the sense of being watched, eyes in the tree line, shadows that moved when the wind didn't, the feeling of a world that was paying very close attention to the fool riding through it, with no gun and no plan beyond the truth. He crossed 3 rivers on the first day alone, each one colder than the last, each one deeper. Copper handled them all with the stoic determination that made her the best horse Thomas had ever owned. At each crossing, he thought about turning back. At each crossing, he thought about Winona's eyes. The eyes won every time. First night, he camped in a meadow surrounded by pines. The sky was so clear he could see the smudge of the Milky Way stretching from one horizon to the other. He built a small fire and ate dried beef and hardtack and thought about what he was doing. A man alone, riding unarmed through territory where the Lakota had every right and every reason to kill him on sight. A man who had nothing to offer a chief but the truth of his feelings and the calluses on his hands. It wasn't enough. He knew that. By any rational measure, it wasn't close to enough. But love doesn't operate by rational measures. It operates by its own gravity, pulling people toward each other with a force that makes reason feel like a suggestion rather than a rule. The first challenge came on the afternoon of the first day. He was crossing a wide meadow when they appeared. 4 young warriors on painted horses, blocking the trail ahead. They were young, barely 20, their faces painted with black and red marks that Thomas had learned meant they were looking for a fight. They carried lances and bows, and their eyes held the hungry, competitive fire of young men eager to prove themselves. Thomas stopped Copper and raised both hands. Empty, the gesture he'd used so many times it had become reflex. The warriors spoke among themselves. Then the leader rode forward and spoke in Lakota. Thomas understood enough to catch the meaning. Why was a white man riding into Lakota territory? Where were his weapons? Was he stupid or brave or both? Thomas answered in his careful, accented Lakota. I ride to speak with Iron Elk. I carry no weapons because I come in peace. I am not stupid. I am in love. Some would say those are the same thing. The warrior stared at him. Then one of them laughed. A short, surprised bark of genuine amusement. He said something to the others, and the tension cracked like ice on a spring pond. They didn't escort him. They didn't stop him. They just parted and let him through, watching with expressions that mixed curiosity with something that might have been respect. The second challenge came at dusk. Thomas was making camp by a creek when he realized he wasn't alone. A figure sat on the opposite bank, motionless, watching him with the patience of a stone. An old man, a Lakota elder with white braids and a face that held more years than Thomas could count. His eyes were sharp and black, untouched by age, radiating an intelligence that made Thomas feel like an open book being read by someone who'd memorized the language. The elder spoke in Lakota, slowly, clearly, as if he knew Thomas would need time to process each word. You are the white man who pulled Winona from the river. I am. And now you ride to ask for her. Yes, Iron Elk has killed 11 white men. He does not hate your people. He simply does not trust them. No Lakota who has lived through what he has lived through could trust them. The elder paused. What makes you think he will trust you? Thomas thought carefully before answering. I don't think he will trust me. I think he will test me. And I think the only thing I can offer is the truth. I love his daughter. I would give my life for hers. Everything else is just details. The elder studied him for a long time. The creek whispered between them. Fireflies began to appear in the gathering dark, tiny sparks of cold light drifting through the tall grass. You speak our language, the elder said. Badly, but you speak it. Most white men do not bother to learn. That tells me something. He stood, his movements slow but fluid. I am Gray Owl. I am Iron Elk's uncle and advisor. I came to see this cowboy my grandniece cannot stop talking about. He paused. I expected someone bigger. Despite everything, Thomas almost smiled. I get that a lot. Iron Elk will test you. 3 tests. He will test your courage, your endurance, and your heart. If you pass, you may speak. If you fail, you leave and never return. If you refuse any test, his warriors will remind you that Lakota territory is not a place for cowards. And if I pass all 3, Gray Owl's expression shifted. Then you will face the hardest test of all, convincing a father that any man is worthy of his daughter. That is a test no one has ever passed easily. He disappeared into the darkness as silently as he'd appeared. Thomas lay by his fire and stared at the stars and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. The 3rd morning brought the camp. Thomas crested a ridge and saw it spread across the valley below. Hundreds of lodges arranged in a great circle along the river, their painted hides catching the morning light. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Horses grazed in herds that numbered in the hundreds. And everywhere, people, women working, children playing, warriors moving between the lodges with the casual confidence of men on their own ground. 300 warriors, maybe more. Thomas could see them throughout the camp, armed and watchful, their eyes turning toward the ridge as word spread that a white man was approaching. He rode down the slope, slowly, hands visible. Hard in his throat, the camp fell silent as he entered. Every conversation stopped, every eye turned to him. The weight of 300 gazes pressed against him like a physical force, and Thomas had to consciously keep his breathing steady, keep his posture open, keep Copper walking forward when every instinct screamed at him to turn around. They formed a corridor, warriors on both sides, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces unreadable. Thomas rode between them, feeling like a man walking through a canyon that might close at any moment. Copper's hooves made the only sound, a steady rhythm against the packed earth. At the center of the camp stood the largest lodge, painted with scenes of battle and hunt in vivid reds and blacks and yellows. Before it sat a man on a raised platform of buffalo robes. Iron Elk. He was everything Thomas had expected and nothing he'd prepared for. A man of perhaps 50 winters, with a face carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him. His skin was deep copper brown, weathered by decades of sun and wind, crossed with scars that told stories Thomas would never know. His hair was iron gray streaked with white, worn in 2 long braids wrapped in otter fur and decorated with eagle feathers. His eyes were the darkest Thomas had ever seen, black as the deepest well, and they held a gravity that made the air around him feel heavier. He wore a war shirt of white deerskin, decorated with elaborate beadwork and quill work, and around his neck hung a breastplate of bone pipes that clicked softly when he breathed. He did not stand. He did not speak. He simply looked at Thomas with those bottomless dark eyes and waited. Thomas dismounted. His legs were shaking, and he locked his knees to hide it. He walked forward until he stood 10 feet from the chief and stopped. The silence was absolute. 300 warriors, hundreds of women and children, every person in the camp watching this one moment. Thomas spoke in Lakota. He'd practiced these words 1,000 times, whispered them to Copper on the trail, rehearsed them by the fire, shaped them in his mouth until they felt natural. Iron Elk, chief of the Hunk Papa. I am Thomas Ridley. I come alone, without weapons, to stand before you and speak truth. I love your daughter, Winona. I ask your permission to marry her. I know I am not worthy, but I will spend every day of my life trying to be. The words echoed in the silence. Iron Elk's expression didn't change. Not a flicker, not a twitch. He was stone. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, the voice of a man accustomed to being heard by hundreds. Gray Owl translated from beside the chief. Iron Elk says you are brave or foolish. He has not decided which. He says many men have asked for Winona. Warriors, chiefs' sons, men of status and wealth and proven courage. He refused them all because none were worthy. Gray Owl paused. He says a white cowboy with no weapons, and bad Lakota is not what he imagined for his daughter. Thomas held his ground. I'm not what I imagined either, but Winona didn't fall in love with what I have imagined. She fell in love with what I am. Gray Owl translated. Something flickered in Iron Elk's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or interest. The chief spoke again. Gray Owl said, he will test you. 3 tests. Courage, endurance, heart. You will begin now. The first test was courage. They brought a horse, not a trained horse, a stallion, wild and unbroken, black as midnight, with eyes that rolled white with fury. It had been roped and held by 4 warriors, and even restrained, it fought with a violence that made the grounds tremble. This was an animal that had never known a saddle, never accepted a rider, never submitted to anything. Ride it, Gray Owl said simply. Thomas looked at the stallion. The stallion looked back with murder in its eyes. 300 warriors watched. Winona watched from the entrance of her father's lodge, her dark, almond-shaped eyes unreadable. Thomas had broken horses before, dozens of them, but never one like this. This animal was different, bigger, stronger, wilder, a creature that understood what was happening and had decided, with absolute conviction, that no human was going to sit on its back. He approached slowly, speaking in low tones, not English, not Lakota, just sounds, the universal language that existed between men and horses, older than any human tongue. The stallion pinned its ears and snapped. Thomas kept coming. He reached out and touched the horse's neck. The animal trembled, every muscle coiled. Then Thomas was on its back. Followed was 3 minutes of controlled violence that left bruises on Thomas's body that lasted for weeks. The stallion bucked, spun, reared, and tried every trick that 4 million years of equine evolution had provided. Thomas stayed on, not through strength, through balance, timing, and the bone-deep understanding of horses that had been his gift since childhood. He rode the fury out of the animal the way a sailor rides a storm, not fighting it, but moving with it, letting the energy pass through him instead of against him. When the stallion finally stopped, sides heaving, foam on its lips, Thomas was still mounted. His nose was bleeding and his left shoulder felt like it had been hit with a hammer, but he was on. The camp erupted, not in cheers, in a low murmur of approval that rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. Wood Iron Elk's expression didn't change, but he nodded once. The second test was endurance. They made him run, not a sprint. A distance run, across the prairie and back, a course marked by warriors stationed at turning points, 5 miles out, 5 miles back, 10 miles total, under the July sun, without water, without stopping. Thomas ran. He wasn't fast. He'd never been fast, but he was relentless. The same stubborn refusal to quit that had kept him on the stallion, kept his legs moving across the prairie when his lungs burned, and his vision blurred and the sun hammered down on his skull like a blacksmith's iron. He ran past the points where his body begged him to stop, past the point where his body stopped begging and started demanding, past the point where even the demands faded, and all that was left was the mechanical rhythm of one foot in front of the other. He finished, collapsed at the camp entrance, gasping, his shirt soaked through, his face the color of brick. But he finished. Warriors brought him water. He drank and kept it down, which was a victory in itself. When he could stand, he stood. When he could walk, he walked back to his position before Iron Elk's lodge. The chief looked at him with something that might have been respect, might have been. The third test was heart. Gray Owl led Thomas to a lodge at the edge of the camp. Inside, an elderly woman lay on a bed of buffalo robes. She was very old, her face a map of wrinkles, her breathing shallow and labored. Beside her sat a young girl, maybe 7, holding the old woman's hand. "This is Morning Star," Gray Owl said. "Iron Elk's mother. She is dying. The fever has been in her for 3 days. Our medicine has not worked." He looked at Thomas with those sharp black eyes. "Iron Elk does not ask you to cure her. He asks what you will do." Thomas knelt beside the old woman. He felt her forehead. Hot, very hot. The fever was raging and her breathing had the wet, rattling quality that meant her lungs were filling. He'd seen this before. On the frontier, everyone had seen this before. He couldn't cure it. He knew that. But he could fight it. The same way he'd fought the river, the stallion, the run. Not with certainty, with everything he had. He sent for cold water from the creek. He stripped the heavy buffalo robes and replaced them with lighter coverings. He bathed Morning Star's face and neck and wrists with cool cloths, bringing the fever down by degrees. He made a tea from willow bark, the frontier remedy for fever, and fed it to her in small sips. He stayed through the night, and the next night, while the camp slept and the fire burned low, Thomas sat beside a dying woman he'd never met and fought for her life with the only weapons he had. Cool water, willow bark, patience, presence, the simple human act of refusing to let someone face death alone. On the third morning, the fever broke. Morning Star opened her eyes, looked at the strange white man sitting beside her bed, and said something in Lakota that made the young girl laugh. Gray Owl translated. "She says you look terrible." Thomas laughed. For the first time in 3 days, he laughed. He walked out of the lodge into the morning light. The entire camp was waiting. Iron Elk stood before his lodge, his face unreadable, surrounded by his warriors. Thomas stood before them, exhausted, unshaven, covered in 3 days of sweat and creek water and willow bark. He looked nothing like a man asking for a chief's daughter. He looked like a man who'd been through a war. Iron Elk walked forward, slowly, each step deliberate. The camp held its breath. He stopped in front of Thomas. Those bottomless dark eyes studied him. read him, weighed him on a scale that measured things no human language had words for. Then Iron Elk did something no one expected. He reached out and placed both hands on Thomas's shoulders, a gesture of respect between equals, a gesture a chief gave to a warrior who had proven himself. The weight of those hands was enormous, carrying the authority of a man who led 300 warriors, and the approval of a father who had just seen something in a stranger that he'd never found in any of the men of his own nation. He spoke. His voice was quiet now, not the voice of a chief addressing his people, the voice of a father. Gray Owl translated, his own voice, rough with emotion. He says, "You have shown courage on the horse. You have shown endurance on the run. But what you showed in his mother's lodge was the thing he valued most. Heart, not the heart that fights, the heart that stays, the heart that sits beside a dying woman through the darkest hours because leaving is not in its nature." Iron Elk continued. He says Winona chose well. He says you are not the man he would have chosen, but you are the man his daughter chose, and he has learned, in his years of leading, that the strongest warriors are not always the ones who look the part. He released Thomas's shoulders and stepped back. Then he turned to his lodge and called out a name. Winona emerged. She wore a white deerskin dress, decorated with the finest beadwork Thomas had ever seen, blue and white and red in the geometric patterns he'd come to know, as well as his own name. Her raven black hair was braided with leather wraps and eagle feathers hanging past her waist. The single eagle feather she always wore caught the morning light. She walked to Thomas and stood before him. Her dark almond-shaped eyes, those eyes that had haunted him since the day by the river, met his. "You look terrible," she said in English. "Your grandmother said the same thing." She smiled, and in that smile was everything. Every stolen visit, every language lesson, every night spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if this impossible thing could ever work. It was all there, distilled into a single expression on the face of a woman who had watched a man ride through every obstacle her world could throw at him and emerge, battered but unbroken, on the other side. Iron Elk spoke again. Gray Owl said, "The chief gives his blessing. The marriage will take place in 3 days, in the traditional way. Thomas Ridley will be adopted into the Hunkpapa band as a son. He will carry a Lakota name alongside his own." "What name?" Thomas asked. Iron Elk spoke a single phrase. Gray Owl translated, "He who crosses rivers." Thomas looked at Winona. She looked at him. And in the space between them, in the silence that held more meaning than any words in any language, two worlds met and decided that the distance between them was not as great as everyone believed. The wedding lasted 3 days. 3 days of ceremony and feasting and celebration that Thomas experienced in a daze of exhaustion and joy and overwhelming gratitude. The Lakota rituals were beautiful, solemn, rich with meaning that he was only beginning to understand, but that he felt in his bones. On the first day, the elders spoke. They told the stories of great unions in Lakota history, of men and women who had come together across differences and built something larger than either could have built alone. Gray Owl spoke longest, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd with the practiced cadence of a man who had been telling stories since before Thomas was born. He spoke of the river, of the day Winona fell in, and the stranger who went in after her. He called it a sign from the spirits. Thomas called it Tuesday. Both were right. On the second day, the warriors danced, not war dances, celebration dances, honoring the courage Thomas had shown and the choice Iron Elk had made. The drums beat a rhythm that Thomas felt in his chest, in his bones, in the part of him that was older than language or culture, or the artificial boundaries between peoples. He watched and felt tears on his face and didn't care who saw them. They exchanged gifts in the traditional way. Thomas gave horses, the best from his herd, including Copper, who he'd raised from a foal. Iron Elk gave buffalo, robes, weapons, and a painted war shield that bore the symbols of the Hunkpapa band. It meant Thomas was family now, protected, claimed. On the third evening, after the last feast, Thomas and Winona sat together by the river where they'd first met. The water was calm now, nothing like the raging torrent that had nearly killed her. It reflected the sunset like a mirror, turning the world to gold. "Your father scares me," Thomas said. "Good, he should. He is a great chief. He made me ride a demon horse, run 10 miles in the sun, and nurse his mother through a fever. I think he was trying to kill me." Winona leaned against his shoulder. Her raven black hair smelled like wood smoke and sage. "He was trying to see you, not the version of you that you show to the world. The real you, the one that comes out when everything else is stripped away." "And what did he see?" A man who does not quit. A man who treats a dying old woman with the same care he would give his own mother. A man who rides into a camp of 300 warriors without a weapon because he believes that love is worth more than safety. She paused. My father has fought wars his entire life. He knows what bravery looks like. But what you did was different. You were brave without violence. That is something he had never seen from a white man. Thomas pulled her closer. The river whispered past. The stars came out, one by one, until the sky was thick with them. What happens now? He asked. Now we live between your world and mine. It will not be easy. Your people will not understand. Some of mine will not either. But my father gave his blessing. And among the Lakota, that is law. And the 300 warriors? Winona smiled that smile again. They are your brothers now, every one of them. If anyone threatens you, they answer to 300 hunk papa warriors and one very angry chief's daughter. Thomas laughed. The sound carried across the water, mixing with the crickets and the frogs and the gentle whisper of the current. It was the sound of a man who had ridden through fear and come out the other side, who had passed every test that a father and a culture and a world could throw at him, and earned something that no amount of money or power or conquest could buy: the right to stand beside the woman he loved. Some called him crazy, a white cowboy who married a Lakota chief's daughter and lived between two worlds that wanted nothing to do with each other. Some called him a traitor. Some called him a fool. But Thomas Ridley called himself lucky, because in a world that drew lines everywhere, he'd found someone willing to step across them. And together, standing on the ground between those lines, they built something that neither world could have built alone: a life, family, a bridge. And if you stood by the Yellowstone River on a summer evening, where the water ran clear and the prairie stretched golden to the horizon, you could almost see them. A cowboy in a dusty brown duster and a woman in white deerskin, sitting by the river, watching the sun go down. Two people from different worlds who had chosen to make one world between them. Love doesn't care about lines. It never has. It just crosses rivers. Years later, when Thomas was old and his dark brown hair had gone silver at the temples, when the scar above his eye had faded to a thin white line, and his sharp blue eyes had softened with the contentment of a life well lived, people would ask him about that ride, about the day he'd gone into the Lakota camp alone and unarmed. He'd tell them the truth, which was simpler than any legend. He'd been scared every step of the way, from the moment he left his cabin to the moment Iron Elk placed his hands on his shoulders. He'd been terrified. His legs had shaken. His voice had cracked. His heart had beaten so hard he'd worried the warriors could hear it. But he'd gone anyway, because some things are bigger than fear. Some things reach down into the deepest part of a man and find a courage he didn't know was there. Not the courage of violence, not the courage of anger, the courage of love, the quiet, stubborn, river-crossing courage that says, "This person is worth everything I have, and I will walk through fire to stand beside them." His children grew up speaking two languages. They rode horses like Lakota and built fences like ranchers. They moved between two worlds with the ease of people who'd never been taught that those worlds were supposed to be separate. And when people asked where they were from, they said something that confused most folks but made perfect sense to them. "We're from the river, the place where two worlds meet." Iron Elk lived to see his grandchildren. The old chief, who had tested Thomas with a wild horse and a 10-mile run and a dying mother, became the man Thomas turned to for advice on everything from raising cattle to raising children. They sat together on summer evenings, two old warriors from different wars, watching the next generation play in the grass by the Yellowstone, and said very little, because by then they'd learned that the best conversations don't need many words. When Iron Elk died, Thomas wept not because he'd lost a father-in-law, because he'd lost a father. The second one the world had given him, and in many ways the better one. Winona found him by the river that evening, sitting in the spot where she'd almost drowned, where everything had started. "He was proud of you," she said, "from the first day. He told me after the horse test. He said any man who could ride a demon and laugh about it was either blessed by the spirits or too stupid to die. Either way, he wanted you in the family." Thomas laughed through his tears, and the river flowed past, carrying the sound downstream, adding it to the chorus of all the sounds it had carried over the centuries. All the stories, all the lives, all the love that had been spoken on its banks by people who understood that the water doesn't care which side of the river you were born on. It just flows, and if you're brave enough, you cross it. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and choices shape destinies in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means the world to us.